Hello and welcome back to our lectures on proximity. Now that we have done some of the conceptual thinking in terms of just actually grouping, let's go ahead and take a look at some design implications of our groups and talk about negative space and placement, which will be a great lead-in to alignment, which will be our next topic. Now, if you recall, here we have the groups that we made just a little bit ago. And all we did was we created them, of course, as you recall, in Microsoft Word. Because design isn't even a part of the process when we did this. At this stage of the game, we couldn't care less about how things looked. First, we have to figure out what it is we're designing before we can design it. So we've done that now. So now let's just take a look at some layout problems and opportunities that these groups can pose to us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in Adobe Photoshop, which you can now download for free, and I recommend that you do that as soon as possible. Adobe Photoshop is not designed to be a page layout program. If you're going to do that, which pretty much is the main thrust of the graphic designer's day-to-day chores, other than the thinking and creativity part, you would use another product by the Adobe Corporation called Adobe InDesign. Now, some people use Quark, which is not by Adobe. It's older, and I'm not going to talk about the features versus that. Adobe InDesign is new and seems to have taken the industry by storm. It's not my place to discuss my personal favorite, but you'll either be working in Quark or InDesign, and every place that I have seen for the past maybe 13 years has used InDesign. The last place that I worked at before I started teaching, they used Quark for about 6 months, and then the art director managed to get the company's owner to switch to the Adobe Creative Suite. So anyhow, the bottom line is normally you're not going to be using Photoshop, and you should never use Photoshop for page layout. I can't stress that enough. Never, never, never. So the question is, why am I doing the exact opposite in this video? Well, that's because Adobe InDesign isn't available for free for download. What we're looking at right now is Adobe CS6, and you can get the previous version, of which there's not too many significant differences. You can get that, like I said, for free. So this is going to be something that you and I are going to have in common, this software. I'm going to have CS6 on my computer, and you should have CS2 at least on your computer. There's just no reason that someone can't get access now to CS2, simply because, like I said, it's free. So anyhow, enough talking about the software. It's not really what I want to talk about anyhow. I want to talk about placing text inside a Photoshop document. So in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is create a Photoshop document. To create a new document in Photoshop is pretty much just like any other software out there. You go to File, because you want to create a new file, and we want to then click on New. And I don't want to get too much into the specifics of Photoshop itself right now, except other than to say, download CS2 for free. But, well, as a matter of fact, what I'll do is I'll have some other lectures later on that are specific to just how to use Photoshop, and I'll see if I can find an older version for you to look at for those. But anyhow, let's go ahead and go to File and New, or just Control N, which brings me to another side topic. Always, always, always learn your keyboard shortcuts. That's the mark of a real professional. So while I was running my mouth, I was doing something else on the screen, which probably shouldn't have done, because I want to concentrate on everything that I do on screen so that you understand what I do. First of all, I typed in 480 next to the height, which is measured in pixels. Pixels are just a tiny little dot of light on your screen. And millions of pixels arranged in rows and columns side by side and on top of each other create what you see on a display screen, whether it's the monitor that you're looking at right now, the screen of your tablet or your phone, any other computer screen, or a flat screen TV. They all show images or moving images in the case of TVs and movies, TV shows and movies, using pixels. And these tiny, tiny, tiny little dots of light, each no more than the tip of a pin, are constantly changing colors. There's about 17 million colors that any one pixel can be. And these pixels change colors up to 30, 60 times or even more per second. And you don't know that. You don't notice the pixels changing themselves because they all change pretty much. It is at least visually to us at the same time, and it gives us the illusion of moving images. And then we get into the whole persistence of vision, optical effect, whatnot, which is also outside the scope of this class, but something worth looking up on your own time. Anyhow, so we're going to create an image based out of pixels. Again, in Adobe InDesign, you would not be doing that. In Adobe InDesign, you would be creating a document, a print document, out of, or that would be measured in inches, not pixels. But since, like I said, we don't have Adobe InDesign for free, this is what we've got, and I'm going to keep hammering home just to make sure that there's no confusion, the differences between Adobe Photoshop and InDesign. Again, for example, like I said, when you're out there doing real projects, you will not be creating an entire layout in Adobe Photoshop. I've actually seen people do that. Why would you not do that? Well, as these people found out, it looks horrible, especially the text. So just remember that this is for demonstration purposes only. Resolution 72. Now this is getting into things that you won't even have to worry about until you get into the IMD 226 print production advanced desktop design class. But normally it should be 300 instead of 72. Anything for print is going to be 300 pixels per inch resolution, or even higher, sometimes 600. But again, this is for demonstration purposes only, so don't worry about the technical settings. Although I have told you the technical settings just so you know that these are in fact actually wrong for real, actual finished product graphic design. Okay, now that I've hammered that home enough, I hope, I'm going to click on the OK button. I'm going to wait for it, and now a new document has appeared. And think of this kind of like, just starting out, kind of like our Microsoft Word experience here. And just like Microsoft Word, where we've got all these buttons and whatnot and tools that allow us to change settings and change the appearance, in Photoshop, in just about any version, you're going to see a lot of buttons, unless you can go way back to Photoshop 2, back in the early 90s or even late 80s. We didn't have nearly this many buttons, and if so, if you started that early, then this is old hat to you. But anyhow, we've got tools for various things that we want to do in order to change this image. The tool that I want to bring your attention to right now is the type tool. And in later versions of Photoshop, when they have so many buttons that they can't fit them all on the screen at the same time, sometimes you'll go to a tool, which is represented by a button, and that button representing that tool will have this little triangle in the lower right corner. If you click on that tool and hold down on it, you get different versions of that tool. But right now, all we want is the horizontal type tool, which I accidentally clicked on, and wish I had not done that. Okay, so we're going to create some text here in just a second. But first I'm going to go ahead and rearrange my workspace, and then I'll show you what I did here in just a second. But I don't want you to waste your time waiting for me to rearrange all my control panels, just so that I can work a little bit more effectively. Alright, now I've got layers showing, and I'll talk about layers here in just a second. Like I said, let's go back to our horizontal type tool here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a text box. And a text box is just a rectangular area inside our document where text can be typed. Now I can type text in there, but in order to save time and to prevent errors, what most graphic designers will do is they will get into the text that they've already created in Microsoft Word or has been provided to them by the client, and they're going to copy that text, and then they're going to paste that text. And what I'm doing is I'm just right-clicking, and now I have some text inside a box. And I can resize the box by going to the lower right-hand corner and dragging as needed. Now what happens if I resize the text box to where it becomes narrower than the actual lines of text? Well, then that causes the text to jump down to the next line. So before I did that, I had 4 lines. But when I made it too narrow, all of a sudden now I've got 6. So always be sure to watch that. And the worst thing that can happen is you resize it so small that some of the text winds up disappearing. And when that happens, in Photoshop, look for the little plus sign right there in the lower right-hand control box. Alright, so that's how you can drag text around. Then I'm going to go to my Move tool, and I can move this text wherever I want. So that's the basics of getting text into Photoshop, which is very similar to what you would do in Adobe InDesign. And like I said before, and I want to keep saying, normally you would be doing this project in Adobe InDesign. And if you can find a free copy of InDesign that's legal, then let me know. So I've got this text here, and I'm moving it around. Well, what this really is, what this text is called a layer. And everything in Photoshop can be put on different layers. Think of layers as old school transparencies, overhead projector transparencies, where there were sheets of clear plastic that had graphics or something like that, or chart or some text on them. And the teacher would put them down on the overhead projector, and light would shine up from the bottom through that clear sheet of plastic onto a lens that then reflected the image at a 90-degree angle onto the wall. And wherever there was not ink on that clear sheet of plastic, the light would just shine through. Well, that's pretty much the operational concept behind layers. And we'll see that here in just a second. But I wanted to go ahead and give you an idea that we're not really moving the text box itself around. We're moving a layer around that is made up of the text box. Later on, you'll have other layers that are photos or parts of photos or logos, whatever. Did I mention that normally we wouldn't be doing this in Photoshop? Just thought I'd bring that up. Okay, so let's go ahead and make another text box. Go back to our horizontal type tool. And I'll draw another text box, and it doesn't really matter if I make it too big, because I can always shrink it down later. I'm going to copy this. Now notice that I did not actually copy this first line here, because that's not text that was provided. That was just text that I came up with as I was grouping them to give that group a name, but it's actually not part of the ad itself. So I'm going to right click again, hit copy. I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and you'll notice there's a cursor blinking. I hope you can see that inside the text box. I'm going to right click again inside the text box and hit paste. And I've actually got a blank line at the very bottom. This happened with the first text box. So I'm going to get rid of that extra blank line by just hitting the backspace button as soon as right after I hit paste. Again, I am going to resize the text box so that it's not any bigger than I need. And now this is going to be a good demonstration of layers. See how you can see between the lines in this layer to the text behind it on the other layer? But is that actually behind it? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is to better demonstrate layers. I'm going to change the color of this text to just red. And sure enough, this layer, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, blah, 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 is indeed on top of or over the other text box. See how the black text is not showing through the red text? And that's because just like the transparencies, back in school, you can put transparency on top of each other, and where there's gaps in the ink in one transparency, you can see whatever's on the transparency below it. And you can restack layers by clicking, holding, and dragging down on the layer in the layers palette. And if you don't see the layers palette, the layers control panel, just go to Windows, Layers, or better yet, hit F7. But whenever you're working in Photoshop or even InDesign, which, like I said, you should be working on it instead, you will always want to have your layers option very handy because you're going to be working in layers constantly, restacking things. Okay, more so in Photoshop than InDesign, but still both. So here we have the black text, Sylvan Springs Animal. Now that is over or on top of the red text, but by restacking it in the layers control panel, the layers palette, I can reverse that, and I can just keep on doing that until I, die of boredom. Okay. Not even really what I want to talk about, but it's going to be a good preamble to when we actually get into the Photoshop lessons, because Photoshop is built on layers. Okay. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and bring in the other text boxes. I'm going to import the other texts from Microsoft Word, and I won't waste your time doing that. And then we'll get into actual proximity. For right now, let's just put everything close together here. And here in just a second, I'll get caught up with you, and we'll talk about arranging.